How do we keep the planet moving towards a greener future? It doesn't happen without driven entrepreneurs and inspired social impact leaders like you. This podcast will give the tools and insight you need to join the sustainability movement and save the world. This is Thinking Green with Mohammed Abdallah.
Welcome back, Thinking Green Nation. This is your host, Mohammed Abdallah. Today, I'm joined by a wonderful guest, Mr. Doug Lewin. Did I pronounce that right, Doug?
You got it, Mohammed. Yep.
Awesome. Nice to see you. I know you, get introduced as the president of Stoic Energy, the host of this new podcast, 9 episodes in, which is pretty awesome with Renewable Energy World. And you have been on the legislative front of all things energy in the state of Texas for a couple decades now. I'd love to start out by just having you give us a little bit more about your background and where you grew up and all that fun stuff. Tell us about who you are.
Thanks, Mohammed. Thanks so much for having me. I should also mention I write the Texas Energy and Power newsletter at Substack. Would love for your listeners to subscribe to that and check out my articles there. I was actually born and raised in St. Louis. Moved down here to Austin to go to UT 30 years ago and never left. I think that's roughly half the population of Austin. How it got here was people looking around and going, I get used to this. It seems nice. So I've been here ever since. I have been working on energy, environment, and climate issues for just about 20 years. Started actually as a staffer in the Capitol, worked there for 5 years. It was kind of an interesting era, 2005 to 2009. The renewable portfolio standard was expanded back then. Energy efficiency programs were expanded back then. Smart meters, green jobs. There was a lot going on back then. It was a great time to kind of cut my teeth in this area. Done a bunch since then. Been a consultant, ran a nonprofit focused on energy efficiency. Still work a lot on energy efficiency to this day. Worked for a company that implemented energy efficiency programs. For the last few years, been a consultant and now more recently a writer and podcaster.
And father. So a lot of titles there. No, that's great. The fact of the matter is a lot of people don't really understand how the Texas grid works, right? And it could be because it's very complex. So in the simplest way possible, how can you explain the landscape of how the Texas grid works to someone who has more of this kind of abstract relationship with electricity, right? Like, I just want to flip a switch, get an electric bill, pay it, and live my life, right? So how do you help them understand the implications of the Texas grid, the way it's structured, the way ERCOT is, the interconnection side of things, just at the most basic level?
Yeah. So, and I think people got, kind of a crash course in this in February 2021. I think everybody knows more about the grid, now than they did pre-February 2021, when obviously we had those multi-day outages. And one of the things people learned back then, Texas is an island as far as its grid, right? So ERCOT covers 75% of the landmass and 90% of the population of the state. There's actually other parts of the state, the panhandles a little bit in Southwest Power Pool and the Woodlands and East Texas, or in MISO, Midwest Independent System Operator, and El Paso's on the Western grid. But for the rest of the state, it's ERCOT, it's islanded, there's limited connections to the rest of the country. And I think what a lot of people don't understand, we think of Texas as such a big place, and it is big in so many ways, right? Like physically and then our egos, we think we're so great, and we are great, by the way. And so Texas has this mythic bigness to it, right? But as far as an electric grid goes, it's kind of small. After February 2021, I remember, I got into a little Twitter exchange with somebody from Australia, and they were just incredulous that Texas was its own grid. It's like, you guys are way too tiny to have your own grid, because generally when you have a grid, you want it over a wide range of or a wide swath of land. So there's a problem somewhere, the resources in the other part of that area can sort of balance it out. And that's why it's like Texas and then Eastern Interconnect, Western Interconnect, because they wanted big areas. We're islanded. The only other thing I just mentioned is that, and we won't go into this too far because we'll lose your listeners if we do, but like it also depends where you live. It's very contextual, right? So Austin and San Antonio have municipal utilities. You can't shop around for a different supplier. And the distribution grid is managed by the city-owned utility. Huge areas of the state have co-ops. By landmass, it's most of the state, but by people, most people are in competition. Almost all of DFW, but not all of it, because Denton has its own utility, right? So like Houston, most of it is competitive area, but not all of it, because the Woodlands has Entergy, right? So it really is balkanized, and it makes it very confusing to talk about it in any sort of general way. It is highly contextual depending on where you live.
Yeah, absolutely. Really well summarized. I think there's something like 64 electric distribution co-ops in the state of Texas. There's a ton of municipal utilities, as you mentioned. Then you have this deregulated area where you can shop for your own retail energy provider. So in my business, it makes it very challenging to keep up with all of the different net metering, solar buyback plans, the rates that have been designed by each and every one of those co-ops, or municipal utilities, or the retail energy providers that are changing their buyback plans, every other day. But historically, kind of when did deregulation pass? Has deregulation accomplished what it set out to achieve? And what have you seen evolve on the Texas legislature, in the Texas legislature on energy and climate over the last 20 years?
Three really good questions. And for that middle one, I would love to I'm going to turn that one around and ask you, Mohammed, because I would love, like, if you're interacting with customers and like, how does deregulation work? But let me answer those, and then I'd love to hear your perspective too. So the market was deregulated, and by the way, a lot of folks in the industry like hate that term because there are quite a bit of regulations, right? It really is more aptly described as restructuring, because the old way that existed since the days of Samuel Insull, who was Thomas Edison's right-hand man, and then when he left Edison and went to live in Chicago, he created the monopoly utility business model. And so I think it's important to actually take a little bit of a historical perspective here, right? In the early days, and you can see pictures if you just Google like Manhattan in 1900 or something, and you find pictures of it. If you find a picture of a street in Manhattan, you'll see wires, like multiple different sets of wires being strung across the street. And it was a very dangerous system. People were getting electrocuted. It was also very expensive, economically inefficient to have competition for poles and wires companies. And so what he did was, what Insull figured out was, I could go to the state legislature. He did this in Illinois in 1907 and asked for a monopoly. We'll be a monopoly, but for that, we'll take a regulated rate of return. We'll let regulators look at all the dollars we spend, approve everything or disapprove, because that way it protects the public interest, but it's a monopoly. So he did that in 1907. By 1914, just 7 years later, basically every state in the country had approved monopoly utilities. That system basically held for the next several generations. In the late 1970s, Congress passed PURPA. I forget what it stands for, public utility. I forget what it stands for, but it basically like opened up a little bit of competition to small generators. In the 90s, there was this wave of deregulation or restructuring. It really was restructuring where it was, this is no longer a monopoly function. It can be competitive. Different companies can figure out how to generate electrons and compete, and that'll drive prices lower for consumers. Texas did that in 1995, and then in 1999 added in retail competition. So now to this day, if you're in DFW or Houston, you can choose between different retail electric providers. It's controversial. A lot of folks don't like it. I actually think it's delivered a lot of value, particularly on the generation side. I don't think there's any doubt that prices are lower because of deregulation. I generally am sort of a markets oriented person. I like to look at it like, think of like restaurants and food, and like, you don't want like the state telling you these are the approved restaurants and you can only go to these and only these can be opened. We all generally like to have choice. Those restaurants that serve people really well and serve delicious food stay open and do real well, and those that don't close and somebody else starts in their place. That drives prices lower. It drives diversity of offerings. I think the same is true with electricity. Although, just like with restaurants, where you need a health inspector, you do need inspections. You need somebody watching the public interest. With Uri, we found that these generators weren't weatherizing well enough. You need inspectors for that, right? So it's not really truly deregulated, where it's just like anything goes. There's competition and there's regulation around how that competition can happen. We can talk about what the legislature has done like more recently on that and what they might do during this legislative session that's going on while we're recording. But I am curious because your business, you're selling solar and EV charging and batteries. Like, do you see that out there, that people being able to choose enables them to get these technologies more perhaps than other markets, or does it not really make a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we were kind of spoiled because for a number of years before, so again, it's like pre-Uri, post-Uri eras. So pre-Uri era, you had consumers that could, purchase a solar energy system and sign up for a 1-to-1 buyback plan that carried credits forward monthly and had the full TDU, charge rolled in, the transmission delivery cost. But since Uri, a lot of those plans have changed, and they stripped the transmission cost out of the buyback for 95% of the plans. The pathway to a $0 bill has become more complicated for the majority of people with distributed solar on their roof, right, on their home. So it's become more challenging because then the value of that solar system from an economical perspective is not as great, and then the only way to really address it and to protect yourself from unfavorable buyback plans long term is to have an energy storage device right on site, and to capture your surplus solar and discharge when you need it and maximize that self-consumption of solar energy. Batteries obviously significantly increase the cost of the system, but then they also provide a ton of value, like grid services, and you could be part of VPPs and all these new technologies that are emerging. But you can also provide backup power for your home when the Texas grid does fail, which I think a lot of people, they look at the grid and they're mad at the grid, and it's like, why are you mad at the grid? Like, the grid was not designed to do what we're asking it to do today, and definitely not the Texas grid, right? And we have this electrification of the cars and the increased load. Like, load creep exists. Everyone's load starts here and then goes here. It always goes up. And more population growth, less and less dispatchable generation. You see it, right? You see this stuff, you're following it every single day. I don't think the majority of consumers understand that the best solution out there that exists long-term for you to have a long-term energy plan is to have distributed solar and on-site storage. And then, if you start to really get into it, having a load management, because that's an important part of the process as well. You've been on the energy efficiency side. Obviously, this stuff doesn't really matter until your home's efficient. Like, make your home efficient and then meet that on-site consumption with on-site solar, and then have a battery to store that surplus solar to use when the sun's not shining, and also when the grid goes out. And that's how you protect yourself from rising utility rates as well as an unreliable grid, right? When there's all types of circumstances that can happen. So, yeah, I think the on the deregulated or restructuring side, like you retermed it, which I like more. Solar buyback plans have been really affected, and so that's made it tough on the kind of the co-op side, the municipal utilities. Some of them have also changed all of them have changed their policies, taken different approach, have different fixed charges, have different true-up periods. Some of them are great, some of them aren't so great for their members, right? It's all about how you present it to the person and how they're perceiving it in the first place. Like, the real value in the technologies we provide is in like truly giving you energy independence and maintaining your sovereignty as a Texan, like,
yeah,
that's how I see it.
I love that concept of energy independence in this context, because I think a lot of times people use energy independence as like our state or our country is going to be energy independent. Like, energy, when you look at energy on sort of the national or global scale, there really is no energy independence. Like, we're bringing in oil from other places to refine it on the Texas coast and sending our oil out. It's all interdependent, but you can, if you have solar and storage and an energy efficient home, be energy independent in that sense. And that is, I'm not sure people cared all that much about that before Uri. And maybe some did, but I think a much wider swath of the population does now.
Yeah, definitely. There are people, they could have had simple solutions to back up small loads in their home to avoid catastrophic damages. And there's just a new wave of consumer out there that's more aware, and that certainly helps get these products out there. But at the same time, the economy has to be doing well, and interest rates have to be at a decent rate, and there's a lot of other factors that play into it all. But I am curious to dive into, sort of post Uri. There's been a lot of changes and a lot of conversations, and how are we going to reinforce the grid, and how are we going to weatherize it, and who was at fault, right, for the failures, and was it all the wind farm that had frozen turbines, or was it the thermal plants that wouldn't fire on, or was it the solar panels that couldn't keep up? So a lot of myths out there that we need to debunk, and who better to speak on this topic than you?
Well, thank you. There's probably a lot of people better than me, but I'm on the list. Look, I think, speaking of who better to speak about it, like the ones that I sort of like quote and repeat on this are the report out of the UT Energy Institute, which came out like June after the February outages, and then the November report of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. And if you look at those reports, these are sort of your, after action reports, your postmortems, right? Like what happened? NERC and FERC, those one federal agency and one standard setting body spent, those 9 or 10 months interviewing everybody they could. And what did they say? Look, all forms of generation struggled. There's no doubt about that. The biggest problem, though, was gas. And it was in sort of two different sides, right? One, gas supply, the output of gas, particularly from the Permian Basin, but from multiple different fields, was deeply curtailed because of the freezing. The biggest problem were compressor stations, but there were also problems with gathering lines, wellheads, pipelines. There were problems all through that chain. And then on the other side, there were problems at the gas power plants themselves. And there actually was some very misleading, there was a lot of misleading, there's a lot of misinformation out there in the days and weeks and months afterwards. But some of the testimony given at the Capitol was, from some of the oil and gas producers was, had the gas power plants not gone down, there wouldn't have been any problems. That's false. The supply, and you can see this in that FERC and NERC report. You don't have to take my word for it. You just go through there, and there's plenty of graphs that show this. Well before the power ever went out on February 15th, there was already a drop in output coming from the gas fields. So That is where the biggest problem was. Look, I don't say all that because it's like renewables good, gas bad. Like, I think sometimes these discussions are just too reductive, right? And then people on the other side say renewables are bad and gas is good. And it's like, let's please get out of the like, A, B, black, white, binary kind of thing.
Yeah, there's no blame culture. Yeah.
You
don't want to have this blame culture. You just want to be solution oriented. Like, there's an issue. Let's find out what happened. Let's be data driven about it. And let's figure out solutions to make the grid more resilient.
Correct. Exactly right. And the things that we need to do to make the grid more resilient really come down to one word across a lot of different things. It's weatherization, or to be more specific, winterization. And it's of several things: of gas supply, of power plants, and of homes and buildings. And I would represent that at this point in time, in 2023, we have not done any of those things well. There have been some laws passed, some regulations passed that require weatherization of gas supply and power plants, but we have very recent history, the December 2022 cold front, where gas output dropped 30%. Outages of gas and coal plants increased overnight on December 22 to December 23rd by 120%. We had 14,000 megawatts of gas and coal plants go offline, by the morning of December 23rd. We know there's still problems. And part of what kind of frustrates me about a lot of the things going on at the legislature and the PUC is they keep talking about market design. And market design is important, but market design should be after, or at least, like, it's crawl, walk, run, right? And like the crawling and the walking piece is like weatherize the system. Make sure that the regulations you have in place are working, and they haven't really done that yet. And they're like not running, they're like trying to sprint and change the way everything's been done for a quarter century when they haven't taken care of the basics. And that I think is a problem.
I would agree. I definitely concur, sir. I think one thing that I definitely want to dive into with you is the whole performance credit mechanism, how that was structured, how that's being rolled out, and then also what that's going to mean for Texas consumers, or at least your prediction, right?
Yeah, so the performance credit mechanism, it's very confusing. It's hard to explain, hard to understand, but I think at its most basic, what it's trying to do is to give some extra payments to generators that are available at times of scarcity. That's like what the proponents of it say it's doing. The problem is the way it's being set up, it's going to funnel a lot of money to generators just if they're available, not if they're actually producing. And it's going to send some signals, I believe, into the market that will keep very old 50-plus-year-old gas plants, 40-plus-year-old coal plants around much, much longer, which it might sound like, okay, well, maybe that's not a bad thing because we're having these problems on the grid. But the way I like to put this is, I think it's helpful for people to think about it. If I tell you, Mohammed, I'm going to send you on a road trip, you're going across the country. I'm going to give you two options. You can have a 1960s car, or you can have a car that was built this year or last year. Which of those would you choose?
The car built last year. Definitely. Yeah.
So we are trying to run a grid on stuff that was built 50 years ago, and we're about to change the market to give a whole bunch more money to those old power plants. Now, some of that new money in the market that consumers would pay, and to your question, this would drive consumer bills up considerably. I mean, I think we're talking on an order of somewhere in a $30 to $50 a month kind of a range. And they, the proponents of it will say, oh, it's like $2 a month. That's just wrong. Their own math is more like $4 to $5, and they're just rounding down to the nearest two or something like that, I guess. But the $4 or $5, like the Senate has put a cap on the performance credit mechanism that would keep it at about that $4 or $5 range. And the proponents of the performance credit mechanism will not allow that cap to stay on. They're like, no, you'll kill the program. And it's like, well, wait, but you said it'd be $4 or $5. So why can't we just cap it there and keep it at $4 or $5? Because the honest truth is the cost for consumers is going to be much, much more than that. It could be as much as 10 times that. And they want to make sure that the cap is somewhere, instead of like 500 million or a few dollars a month, is more like 8 or 10 billion, and could rise as high as $30 to $50. So the problem beyond the cost is that a lot of that money is going to flow to these very old plants that, if they are just available during times of scarcity, they'll get paid. And there's going to be other times of scarcity where they're not available, but they're still going to stick around. And we're just doubling down on a system that is already fraught and not working real well. And the best thing you could do to get new generation is to have that old generation retire. And we're going to keep, we literally have 5,000 megawatts. Put that in perspective. That's more than the entire Austin Energy Service territory would use at peak. That was built in the 1960s. We have 1,000 megawatts that was built in the 1950s, and we're still trying to run our grid with that stuff. It's time to let that stuff go and get the new stuff in. And that's where, what Good Faith Energy does, right? Like your business, like, this is what we need to move towards. We need a lot more distributed energy, solar with storage, with energy efficiency, electric vehicles providing power into the market, that managed charging, and even vehicle to grid as we start to get into those kinds of technologies. So that's where we should be moving. And I think really what's going on is they're just trying to create this new revenue stream that will funnel a lot of money to these 40 and 50-year-old coal and gas plants and keep them around much longer, despite their less than stellar track record during events like Uri and other cold and hot weather events.
Yeah, agreed, Doug. I really enjoy hearing you speak about this stuff, because it seems like you're, an advocate for us in the legislature day in and day out. And that's what we need more than ever, because it really is an uphill battle to find a solar, prospect or someone interested in batteries, win them over your competition, jump through all the red tape with the city permits and the utility permits and the HOA stuff, get a good quality installation up on the roof, and then service it for as long as you can. One of the things, because we could sit here all day long and I could ask you about the slew of bad, policies that are being rolled out, and obviously we know that there's some challenges, but I also want to talk about some of the pros, right? The good things. And so one of the things that we saw come from recent legislation was the ADERS program, or the Aggregated Distributed Energy Resources Program, which allows some folks to come in and maybe have some virtual power plant set up that allows their bank of batteries to provide grid services for demand response or frequency regulation or whatever it is, just to kind of manage that wholesale cost of electricity. So I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on the ADERS program? What kind of movement is there, and really what kind of future market exists if something like this actually proves itself, and because I think that at the end of the day, there's some fundamental issues with renewables, right? Someone that's like, yeah, I might want that car built last year, but I also want to make sure that it's going to work when I need it to work, in times where I'm driving 800 miles and there's no charger or whatever, right? So in this case, with the intermittency of renewables, the fact that loads are not intermittent, right? That most people need power, that it's dispatchable, right? We've been accustomed to having just on off, right? So I'm curious to know, what do you think is gonna come out of the ADERS program, and what does the future outlook look like for programs like that in general?
Yeah, I'm really excited about that program. And first of all, let me just say I'm actually not around the legislature. I watch what they do. I try to inform the public through my the Texas Energy and Power newsletter, through my Twitter feed, stuff like that. I try to stay away from there. The place drives me crazy.
I gotcha. Yeah.
But there are some bills related to ADERs over there. The Senate Bill 2112 is one of those that would put distributed energy resources at critical facilities like hospitals and nursing homes. That kind of stuff is just absolutely just so fundamental and important. And the PUC deserves a ton of credit for that ADR pilot. That's the aggregated distributed energy resource pilot. That's an 80 megawatt pilot that is now underway. Again, really, I want to hear your perspective on this too and how it's working, if you're able to sign customers up and all that kind of stuff. But, to your point about the intermittency of renewables, we're going to need to do a lot of things in order to balance that out, right? So what we want from the renewables, obviously, is that it's clean and it's low cost, right? Zero marginal fuel cost, no emissions. These are great things. There's also tons of economic benefit to the state. Some of the number one fastest growing county in the entire country is in West Texas. The average GDP went from like $40,000 to $70,000 per person because of the wind energy being installed. There's been a huge economic boon to the state of Texas. There's all these good things. The challenge, of course, is that the output is variable. So that is a place where the distributed energy resources, particularly batteries, can come in, but also demand response, right? So what you said about, load or demand not being intermittent is certainly true in a sense, right? There's a certain base load of demand that is just always there. It just doesn't drop below, 35, 40 gigawatts in ERCOT. But there's a ton of ability to move things around within there, right? And this is one of the fundamentally different things about the electric utility industry, right? This is, again, going back to the early history of the industry. What goes around comes around. I was talking about Sam Insel earlier in this conversation. Sam Insel knew this. Like he knew, if I build so if you think about the early days of the electric industry, some of the first uses, of course, were lights. So they were actually seeing higher use at night and less during the day. But think about it, right? Air conditioning wasn't invented yet. So he's trying to figure out ways, and he actually was one of the first people in the electric utility industry. Well, he was one of the first people, period. But he actually offered variable rates, right? They tried to get factories to site in their utility area and gave them lower rates if they would be interruptible and move around, right? So these interruptible rates that industrials have had forever, what we're seeing now is kind of a democratization of that. It's not available only to industrial customers. If you have an electric hot water heater or a pool pump, right? These kinds of things, an electric hot water heater, I don't care when you make that water hot. As long as when I turn it on, I can have a hot shower. So if the sun is shining bright at 3 and 4 in the afternoon and you heat up my water tank, then great. Don't do it at 7 or 8 or 9 when the sun's going down and the prices are higher, right? So this kind of what is often referred to as elasticity of demand, that demand is not constant, and the price of all of that, there can be a price discovery and a price curve for demand. And I know at this point in the conversation, a lot of the sort of skeptics and naysayers say, but nobody wants to deal with all that. I don't want to get a signal on somebody on my phone saying, oh, power prices are high, turn things down. Again, think about the evolution of technology and where we're at. This can be automated. This can be done with AI. This can be done in an automated way where you have preset, right? If the price gets this high, stop charging my electric vehicle, stop heating my water. And by the way, I get paid for that. I get a bill credit or I get cash for that. So this is the way that the system is going. There's going to be billions of interconnected points on the distribution grid that are either generating power, storing power, or reducing power for a price. And we've got to get started on this. Everybody recognizes this, the Public Utility Commission, ERCOT, generators, all the different energy companies, no matter what sort of part of the value stream they're in. There is a widespread recognition in the market that we need these distributed energy resources to increase reliability and to lower cost. In Texas, a lot of times we leave out the emissions part of that, but I happen to think that's very important too. And I think the vast majority of the public does.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, so it does, and DERs do all three of those things. If you care about only one of those three things, you should want more distributed energy resources on the system. But if you care about all three, you should really want them, right? Reliability, cost, and emissions. It checks all those boxes.
Decarbonization. Do you think that, or do you believe that Texas is inevitably headed to like a time of use style pricing structure?
I think that it is heading that way for those that want it. I think that this is one of the beauties of the competitive market, is that you can have that kind of innovation in there. Yes, I do think we will see more and more customers choosing that because they want it, because it controls their cost, and because they can contribute to decarbonizing. They can be part of that if they're into that. But again, like, you're not choosing between decarbonize. This is so fun, right? Because like 10 years ago, it was like, do you want to pay more to reduce emissions, right? Now that's not an either or. Those two things go together like this, because wind and solar are the cheapest. And the challenge is to try to integrate those in a way that increases reliability and lowers costs and all that kind of stuff. So to answer your question, I do think that's the way it's going, but I often think people get spooked by that. And I actually don't think it's necessary that 100% of the population has that. I think a lot of people just really like the flat billing, and like, that's fine. I don't think we need 100% of the population participating in a distributed energy resource offering. Honestly, if 10 or 20%, I mean, we're talking about an 80 megawatt pilot right now, right? We're talking about like, a few thousand customers. If you get 10% of Texas, you're talking about 1 million customers. That would make a huge difference. So I don't think we're talking about all or even half to make a huge difference in lowering costs and increasing reliability, lowering emissions.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I'll give you a couple of examples from my business and what I see. So particularly customers that own electric cars and invest in energy storage systems, they typically are able to really maximize the value of their systems by joining like a free nights plan, and they shift the majority of their heavy loads like the charging and drying their clothes and whatever have you to the evening, and then maximizing the self-consumption of solar energy during the day, and repeating that cycle over and over. And like you said, to reduce their cost. There's also virtual power plant style retail energy plans that are already existing, like the Tesla electric plan. So I've had multiple conversations with my counterparts there just to talk about their plan, how, in a lot of areas, if you've purchased a Tesla Powerwall battery, backup system, then it'll show up. Do you want to join the Tesla electric plan? And you're able to basically join a time of use plan that has a peak and an off peak. I think the peak is from 4 to 7 p.m. and then the off peak is vice versa, 7 p.m. to 4 p.m. Yeah, and then during the off peak periods, obviously it's cheaper. During the peak periods, it's more expensive. But then you're charging off your batteries, or you're powering your home off your battery packs during that stretch. And then the buyback rate, or what they would call really the sell rate. So the rate at which I'm selling electricity back to the grid is dependent on the wholesale market. Obviously that can be a bad thing, but it can also be a very good thing if wholesale power prices are very high. And then you can protect yourself against low sell rates by just maximizing again the cycling of your battery system. So there's different plans, and they actually when they sense that the wholesale power is high, they can actually export power to the grid and get you 30-50 cents a kilowatt hour, even more during certain winter storms. So it just gives this a whole new feel, like you were saying about how different plans will enter the market that allow people to also design how they want to use electricity in order to control their cost as much as possible. And whenever they can roll in the cost of their transportation into that equation with an electric car, it just makes that much more sense. And so,
and there, by the way, Mohammed, is like another, example of where the competitive market, like Tesla could do that, right? Tesla could just set up a retailer and start offering, right? It's not like if you're in a vertically integrated area, you're Southern Company or Duke or something like that. You've got to go work with them and design a tariff and all that stuff. No, like just start. And you see that with, Octopus and Ohm Connect and David Energy, MP2, all these different retailers that are in the market offering innovative products. I will tell you on the time of use, I think that the next thing that we've really got to look at, though, that the retailers can't do much about is that distribution charge. Having that as a fixed, you were talking about that earlier, right, with the solar buyback, that they weren't they weren't including that. And that's because it's up to 4.5 cents. I think it's 4 cents in Encore, 4.5 cents in Centerpoint. That's really, really high. And it's the same at 5, 6, 7 o'clock on a summer day when we're 105 degrees, or if it's just a pretty spring day and it's 70 degrees, it's all 4 cents. And that doesn't send any kind of a price signal. It really mutes that price signal to have time of use. So I do think that regulators and policymakers in Texas are going to need to look at that soon.
No, definitely. And I have a couple more questions for you. One is about SPAN and smart load management. So what are your thoughts about, smart load management and its role in all of these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like that demand flexibility. It's similar to that ADR discussion we were just having, right? That demand flexibility. I started to say this and I didn't really finish the thought. So for 100 years of the electric utility industry, you basically, you design a system, you say, okay, demand's going to be here. You predict what demand's going to be, and then you build enough supply. So it's that plus 15%, right? Like, I think I'm going to need this much, add 15% to it. That's how much supply I'm going to build. That's, it's been a pretty straightforward kind of a calculus. Well, now with all the different, variable renewables, with electric vehicles coming, so we see very, very spiky kind of demand, demand that's not like this nice curve where like, oh, it starts low and in the middle of the day it's high. Now you're going to have like, it goes here and then it like goes up and then it comes down and then it goes up, right? You're going to have all these weird things happening on the demand side too. So that demand flexibility will allow us to move away from that old formula. If you keep that formula, you're going to have just a massive overbuild of generation, because you're going to have to say, okay, an average home used to use 5, 6, 7 kilowatts. Well, now with a level 2 charger, now every home is 10 or 15 kilowatts. So now we're taking all that across all millions of homes, plus the 15%, reserve margin. Like, we're going to have to build so much power. I would just represent that there is no way for any utility system to work going forward without a lot of demand flexibility in it. It is a prerequisite for put aside clean for a minute. Don't even think about emissions. Just for reliability and affordability, demand flexibility is an absolute must. So what do we mean by that? If folks are listening that aren't as much of sort of into the energy wonkery as you and I are, Mohammed,
Yeah.
One way I like to describe this to people, and you're right, like you said earlier, you need an energy efficient home. That's sort of like the foundation, the base for all of this, right? But if you have an energy efficient home, it's going to be 105 today. And, picture a day in July or August in Texas, it's going to be 105 degrees. And we know we've got a lot of solar on the system now. Texas, I believe, is just probably in the last week or two, or maybe the next week or two, but we're right at about the point where we passed California and utility scale solar in Texas. We got a lot of solar. And this will be true each passing year. So we're not too worried about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. What we're worried about is 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. Sun starts to go down, still a lot of air conditioning load on the system. So I might say to you, hey, Joe and Jane homeowner, how about this? We're going to make your house cold during the middle of the day. You usually keep it at like 76. We're going to make it like 72. You might want to put a jacket on inside your home in July. And that's not wasteful because we've got tons of solar and the power price is cheap right now. Okay, great. But here's what we're going to do is we're going to then, whatever your comfort point is, we're not going to ask you like ERCOT does during the summertime. Oh my God, we're getting close to outages. Everybody put your thermostat up to 78. We're never going to ask you to do that again. Where do you like your thermostat to be? You like it to be 76? We're never going to go above 76. We're going to make it colder early so that then you'll be using less at 7 or 8 at night, right? We're going to let that kind of flow through. It's going to creep up to 73, 74, 75. When it's 76, it'll come back on. But so, and for that, for having to have the problem of being cold inside your home in a Texas summer, which exactly nobody would object to, we're going to pay you for it because you're going to be using less during the peak. You're going to get a bill credit for this or a gift card to the movie theater or whatever it is you want, right? That kind of demand flexibility. And that's one that, like, you're talking about the air conditioner. Some people will never want to deal with that. Don't touch my air conditioner. Fine. What about your electric hot water heater? What about your pool pump? What about your electric vehicle? All these loads that you don't care when it charges, as long as it works when you need it, you're fine, right? So that kind of demand flexibility, not only what we have to get away from is people thinking of conservation and efficiency as privation. You're going to be sweating inside your home in the summer. No more. We've got to do away with that. And that's when we get not just a few thousand people participating in these things, not just a few 100 megawatts of reductions, but millions of people and thousands of megawatts of reductions when we need them.
I couldn't agree more. I think load shifting is got to play a huge piece of it, and people are going to just have to have some lifestyle changes in order to adapt to an ever-changing grid and an ever-changing way in which we interact with electricity and energy in general. At the most basic level, what do you think it takes to get lower bills for consumers? Is the only way through distributed energy resources and to control it long term? Obviously, I'm biased, so that's what I think. But you tell me, what do you see happening through a lot of these mechanisms? Do you think that the cold metal on the grid is just going to get more and more expensive, and then ratepayers are going to suffer at the expense of bad legislation? I guess that's the magic question, so I'm just curious.
I don't know what's going to happen with legislation. I will say distributed energy resources are going to be a big part of customers controlling their costs. Energy efficiency, which I think those things just go together. Energy efficiency can even be a distributed energy resource if it's measured based on its time and locational value. But I think a couple other things too, Mohammed. I think we need as much wind and solar on the system as we can get. That we need every megawatt of it we can get. That's going to drive prices lower. I think we've also got to take a really hard look at and start having some really substantive discussions on the transmission and distribution part of the bill, because that has been rising relative. Generation costs have dropped as we've gotten more renewables and as gas has been $2 or $3, 2022 notwithstanding. But, gas has generally been pretty cheap over the last decade. So the generation portion of the bill has dropped quite a bit, but customers' bills have not dropped. And that's because the transmission distribution part has increased. And most of that is distribution. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what transmission costs are, but most of that's distribution. So we've got to start looking at how to control that part of the bill and how to do it in a way that, I really think what we're talking about there is utilities beginning to take on more and more of a distribution system operator role. They can do quite well under that. They can be highly profitable enterprises. But again, this is probably like the fifth time this interview I've done this, but I think I think the history of this is so important. The utility business model we have guaranteed rate of return, right? Guaranteed 10% on every dollar you spend. And the reason we did that, not we, but the reason that was done by policymakers and Sam Insall 100 years ago is because they were trying to attract as much capital to the space as possible, right? We didn't have a grid back then. We needed to build it out. It was a risky investment for capital. So they said, here's a guaranteed 10%. It worked. Capital flowed into that space. Is that the model we need today when customers are spending their own money to put solar and storage at their homes? Do we still want to tell the utilities, hey, every dollar you spend, we'll give you 10%? Or do we need to look at a different model? Again, one they can still be highly profitable in, but that gives a profit motive, a signal to them, a profit signal, right? There's a way to make money that the less you spend, the more you make. The higher reliability, the more you help customers interconnect their DERs, you'll get paid based on those things.
So sort of like efficiency measures, for being incentives for being a good Samaritan, discharging your power when the grid needs it from your system, maybe, and shedding load and shifting load, and there's so many ways that we can each and every one of us can support the grid, and it may be all unique. And there's no one size fits all approach for every single person depending on their specific needs. But I definitely think that, I just had to interject there and kind of jump in that I do believe that this is the way of the future. I also want your opinion real quick on large scale batteries and incentivizing large scale batteries, with these huge solar and wind farms. Do you see that happening in Texas? I know there's a big interconnection pipeline for energy storage. Obviously not all of that will get built out. But do you ever see a world in where, the dispatchable generation is down and the population growth is up, and we're worried about brownouts at 9 o'clock at night if the sun goes down and the wind doesn't pick up, right? But do you ever see a world where they say, okay, well, one of the best solutions might be to find a way to have a performance credit mechanism for large scale storage?
It's a great question. So we have a lot of storage right now. We have about 10 times right now we had 2 years ago. We're up to just about 3,500 megawatts in ERCOT right now. ERCOT thinks that'll triple by next summer. We'll have 10,000 megawatts. So again, to give some scale to that, the whole Houston area is about 12,000 megawatts. So, 10,000 megawatts of storage by next summer is a lot. I think that storage and demand flexibility can very much handle the summer problems quite well. I do think the winter problems are going to need some longer duration energy storage. And I think it's absolutely critical. If they're going to go forward with this performance credit mechanism, they've got to figure out a way to send a very strong signal to long duration energy storage, because, a lot of the discussion at the Capitol right now seems to be, from all these hearings and all that, is like, we need more natural gas. But the problem is, and NERC says this, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation has told Texas, be careful, because you get what is called common mode failure, right? That like, if we already have a system where half of our capacity is gas and we're highly dependent upon gas in the wintertime, if you put more gas there and then the gas supply system fails, as it did in Uri, now you've just created more of a problem. So the idea is to try to diversify the dispatchable, flexible, and longer duration resources. And right now, there's not much of a signal in the market for that long duration storage. So that is something, whether through, I think the performance credit mechanism is so flawed, it's not worth pursuing. But if they do pursue it, it should incentivize long duration energy storage. And if they pursue something else, it should incent, whatever that might be. We have to figure out a way to get those price signals to long duration energy storage.
Agreed, Doug. Well, Doug, I know we're over time. I really do appreciate your time so much. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, share this content with your friends and family if you think they'd be interested in understanding how the Texas energy market is shaping out. leave a comment below or just disagree with our conversation if you so wish, and we can get into a healthy conversation. So thanks again, Doug, for your time. It's been a pleasure, man. I would love to have lunch with you sometime soon, so we'll make that happen. And best of luck to you with all the work that you're doing on the research side, on the advocacy side, on the consultancy side. I'm sure all the recent updates and developments are keeping you super, super busy. Keep us in the loop whenever you're in Dallas, Fort Worth, or ready for a barbecue in Austin. We'll also come by and see you. And, I hope you have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, Mohammed. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Bye-bye. I didn't realize you wanted me to talk here.
No, it's just for the outro.
Thank you for listening to Thinking Green with Mohammed Abdallah. This episode was brought to you by Good Faith Energy. For more information, check out goodfaitenergy.com. Make sure you subscribe, give us a review, and leave a 5-star rating. If you like this episode, share it with a friend. See you on the next episode of Thinking Green.